Good afternoon, everyone. It is Wednesday, January the 8th, 2020. It is currently 12:48 p.m. Central Time, and thank you for listening to another live broadcast for the Theology Central podcast. Now, I am somewhat excited about this live broadcast, but at the same time, somewhat frustrated. I have tried to do this live broadcast 2 times. This is the third try. And in every case, something went horribly wrong. Either something was going wrong. Well, I literally completed one live broadcast only to find out that there was some major sound problem. So delete that one, attempt number 2. Got about, 15 minutes into it. Everything went wrong there. Had to stop that live broadcast, which is horribly embarrassing when that occurs. And there's a reason why. Well, I'm gonna possibly do a live broadcast and kind of give you some information about a lot of things happening here and some things things we're waiting to get set up. Once it gets set up, some of those problems with doing live broadcast will go away. I've got to fix the sound quality problems. I think I'm onto something. We will see. If this one doesn't work out, it's going to be extremely disappointing. But I think this is working out. We'll find out. So I'll do a live broadcast and kind of give everyone an update. But so I'm excited about doing this, but I'm worried that this is not going to go well because it just seems like every time I try to talk about this subject, everything goes wrong. But I believe this is a very important topic, all right? And I hope that everyone listens to me carefully because there is going to be great potential for people to completely miss the point. They're going to lose the plot somehow, and they're going to focus in on one thing, even though that's not the main point, all right? That's not the main point. So you've got to make sure you understand my main point, and trust me, I'm going to emphasize the main point over and over and over and over again. So this is what we're going to do. We're going to talk about the tragedy happening in Australia with the horrible wildfires, some refer to them as bushfires, occurring in Australia. We have, according to some estimates, almost 1 billion animals have been killed. Some say there will be local extinction of some species. The amount of land that's been burned is staggering. Buildings, people have died. Now, the numbers for how many people have died, depending on the news articles, sometimes you'll see like 14. I've seen 22. I think I've seen as high as 30. So we have a horrible tragedy. Land is being destroyed. Animals are dying. Human beings are dying. It's a tragic situation, and we should pray for everyone who's in the path of these fires, whose lives have already been, turned upside down. They've lost property. Maybe they've lost loved ones. Pray for everyone involved. Pray that these fires are contained and come to an end, and they do so soon. And I want to stress this very carefully. We're going to be talking about these fires, but we're going to be utilizing these fires to get to a theological point. In no way, shape, or form am I minimizing the tragedy that has occurred. In no way am I trying to minimize what has happened. I'm simply going to use this situation to try to get to a very important theological principle. And some people may misunderstand that, but this is the Theology Central podcast. We look at what's happening in our world from a theological perspective. And when I have watched the news coverage about these fires, I have seen a very important theological lesson for all Christians. And it has to do with the way we interpret the Bible. So in taking this tragedy and utilizing it to illustrate a very important spiritual point, I am no way, shape, or form minimizing the fire or the tragedy, and I don't want anyone to accuse me of doing that. So we're gonna look at the fires. We're gonna look at how the news has covered these fires, what the news coverage looks like, sounds like. We're gonna look at a little bit of controversy about the news coverage, and then we're going to move over to biblical interpretation. So a lot to try to cover in one live broadcast, all right? So let's begin this way. Let's listen to a report that was aired on NPR radio. They did a 5-minute report about the fires in Australia. 5 minutes. Now, sometimes on radio news, they do, very short segments, but here's 5 whole minutes dedicated. They're going to talk about the fires. They're going to talk about the tragedy of the fires. And I want you to listen to kind of the narrative that is put forth. It's a two-part narrative. Part one, these fires are tragic and destructive. Part two of the narrative is somewhat interesting, and I think could be considered by some very controversial. So, part one, listen carefully to the narrative. The fires are horrible, they're bad, they're tragic. Then listen to part two. In fact, part two of the narrative is where they spend most of their time on and discussing the fires. And you may find it interesting, all right? So listen carefully. Here is from NPR News, their discussion on this very important situation. Listen to the narrative, though. Listen to the narrative. Here we go.
Large swaths of Australia are on fire. Thousands of people have been stranded on beaches as millions of acres burn. At least 11 people have been killed since Monday, and the peak fire season is just getting started. Greg Mullins is the former Commissioner for Fire and Rescue for the state of New South Wales. He's joined other emergency leaders demanding the government tackle climate change, which they say is supercharging the fires. Mullins is also a volunteer firefighter, a member of the Emergency Leaders for Climate Action. We spoke to him before he headed out to join other volunteers. I asked him how the government is handling the crisis.
So our national government, they're missing in action in terms of leadership, and it's all because the penny has dropped with the Australian public that our out-of-control wildfires are driven by climate change. This has been a 20-year trend. We have 10 million acres on fire in one state alone. Our national government doesn't want to know about climate change. They're doing very little to help the states fight these fires.
Why is the government, or why has the government been so hostile in pushing for climate change reforms in Australia?
Look, we have a Prime Minister who was infamous for holding up a lump of coal in Parliament and joking and giggling like a schoolboy, saying, look, this won't hurt you, everybody. This is the basis of our economy. And a couple of Prime Ministers have lost their jobs over climate change. So he's rusted on to his narrative about doing nothing about climate change and that we don't really emit much in Australia. Our emissions have been going up every year under this government, not down. And as fire chiefs, we've been watching the wildfire situation, our cyclones or hurricanes, our storms, our floods get worse and worse as extreme weather just gets more and more extreme. So we have areas burning in Australia that have never burnt before. We have trees in Tasmania, Huon pines, that are 3,000 years old. They have no fire scars on them. We have tropical rainforest burning.
You know, the people of Australia in the end elected this Conservative government. They rejected politicians pushing for climate change reforms. Has anything shifted?
It's an interesting question, and there's a lot of debate in Australia, but the public is screaming for action now. It just seems to me that our Prime Minister does not have his finger on the pulse of the nation because they're seeing things they've never seen before. They're frightened. People in Sydney are all coughing because we're covered in smoke. Australian cities are just, you can't see for more than 200 yards. It's just horrific. And we've lost about 1,500 homes in New South Wales alone. So people are waking up, but it seems our government and our Prime Minister are not.
So let's say Australia does turn a corner. In the end, it's a continent with a tiny carbon footprint, a country of some 26 million people. So if China, India, and the U.S. aren't going to reduce emissions, what difference does it make if Australia changes?
So that's been an argument that the Prime Minister has used. Now, to put it into perspective, out of 200 countries, we're number 15, so we're not small in the scheme of things. If you add in the coal that we export, we're one of the biggest exporters of coal, oil and gas. We're number 5. And look, Australia has always punched above its weight internationally. And what I mean by that is we've taken on issues like apartheid in South Africa, nuclear disarmament. We've taken a moral stance. As a nation, we've always tried to do the right thing. And I think a lot of Australians are looking at our government at the moment and thinking, where is the moral leadership? how can our Prime Minister go to President Trump or to other countries and say, look, our country is burning, we're doing our bit, you now need to do your bit. We can't do that at the moment because we don't have the moral or ethical standing to be able to make those phone calls.
Now, you yourself are a firefighter and you're headed for the fires. Do you have a sense of when they might be under control?
No, I don't. And look, so most wildfire firefighting in Australia is done by volunteers, and the urban fire departments also send strike teams, so 5 engines out to assist, and we have forestry and national parks, so it's a united force. I was 39 years as a professional firefighter and ended up chief for 13 years. I've gone back to my roots where I started with my father as a volunteer wildland firefighter. So I've been fighting fires for 47 years. Mm-hmm. I've never seen anything like this. We saw it coming. All the 29 other ex-chiefs and I have seen this coming for the last 20 years. The bad season's becoming more frequent. Around the world, everything's heating up. We're getting wildfires in countries that never had them before, like the UK, Greenland. This is a worldwide problem. This is climate change in action, and everybody needs to sit up and take notice.
That was Greg Mullins, former Commissioner for Fire and Rescue for the Australian state of New South Wales.
Now, did you pick up the narrative? Part 1, fires, tragic, destructive, horrible, destroying all kinds of things. Part 2 of the narrative, climate change. And if you hear there at the end, basically, hey, all these fires, this is climate change in action. Climate change equals fire. That's almost the way. In fact, if you listen to that entire report, that's 5 minutes. They did not tell you how the fire started. They didn't tell you if it was caused by human beings, what started the fire. No. Fire's bad, climate change. And they started talking about reducing emissions, carbon footprint, and it turned into a discussion about climate change. So, and I want to make sure you listen to this very carefully. They have a perspective. They have a system of belief. And that system of belief is that climate change is real. Climate change is occurring. And because climate change is real and climate change is occurring, they interpret the fires through the lens of climate change. Fire bad, climate change real, climate change is to be blamed. This is climate change in action. Wildfires is climate change in action. And wherever you see fires, climate change has something to do with it. Almost as if, I'm not saying that they explicitly said this, but it seemed to be clearly implied. In fact, if you listen to the 5-minute report, by the time you're at the end, if you just walk away, you're almost like, man, we got to get climate change under control. The whole world's going to burn up. These fires, climate change is causing wildfires. That would be your conclusion. Now, listen to me carefully. Listen to me carefully. I am not here to debate climate change. I'm not here to debate. If you want to say it's real, if you want to say it's not real, I'm not here to debate that. What I am here to talk about, listen to me carefully, is how the news covered this specific situation. And this specific situation, a 5-minute report talking about the fires in Australia, focused on climate change. Let's, for argument's sake, climate change is real and that climate change is caused by human beings. All right, because I don't think there's a lot of people will agree climate change is occurring. The argument is why is it occurring? Is it occurring because of what we're doing, or is it just a natural cycle? That's where usually the debate is, right? It's happening, but who's to blame and what can actually be done? But I'm not here to have that argument. I'm here to have the argument that according to them, Australian wildfires, climate change in action. So if I look at the wildfires, we need to discuss climate change. This is not the only place this is occurring. This is all over the news media, the way that they talk about, when they talk about these fires, this is the narrative you get. They're horrible, climate change. I'll give you an example. The other day I was listening to Beats One. Now, if you don't know what Beats One is, that is the live radio station that is a part of the Apple Music streaming service. And at 11 a.m. Central Time, Monday through Thursday, the DJ that comes on at 11, his name is Zane Lowe. And he, I think, grew up or lived in Australia at some point in his life where he has family there. He has a strong connection to the area. So about 30 minutes into his program, he said, we've got to talk about these fires in Australia. This is a horrible situation. It hits close to home. You could tell he was emotional. You could tell he was bothered. And you know, I think he has people who are even possibly in line of the fires and were possibly in danger. So you could hear his emotion and you can understand that. But what was interesting is this is how the conversation went. The fires are horrible, they're bad, and it is time for us to stop ignoring it. We have to talk about it. Climate change. Climate change. These fires are the direct result of climate change. And then he played Greta Thunberg, the teenage environmentalist who's, was on, I think, was it Times Person of the Year? I think it was Times Person of the Year in that magazine. And, you know, she's been in the news. And again, nothing against her. She's a young person who cares about the environment, cares about the world in which she lives. She wants the planet to survive. Okay, good. She's caring about something big. Now, we could argue whether we agree with all of her perspective on climate change, whether we agree or disagree. That's not the point here. The point is, here's a discussion about the Australian fires, and it turned into, for this DJ, he spent like 20 minutes. Climate change, we got to stop denying it. It's real. It's causing these problems. So again, climate change in action equals wildfire in Australia. Again, the DJ did not speak on how it started. Nothing along those lines. All right. So again, if you walk away from the news coverage, what is causing the wildfires? Climate change. Now listen to me carefully. Why does this happen? Climate change is their system of belief. That is how they see the world. So they take the system of belief and interpret everything through that lens. And any information that seems to contradict what they may think, they just ignore. Let me give you an example. I'm going to pick up my iPad right here. This comes to us from thechristianpost.com. All right. Now stay with me here because I know that there are websites calling this information into question. We're going to look at those websites as well, because I'm not afraid of information that contradicts what I'm saying. I'm just going to give you all the information here, because again, the ultimate goal here is to get to a theological discussion about biblical interpretation, and you'll see how all this relates in just a minute. Here is the story from the Christian Post. Australia. 183 people arrested for arson as deadly bushfires rage. At least 25 people killed. Now, this was published yesterday. Now, hear that. 183 people arrested for arson. NPR did not even mention that. NPR did not mention anyone being arrested. Now, there's debate here that it wasn't 183. Some are arguing that number is false. But let me go here. Snopes argue that that's false. But ABC News is reporting 24 Australians arrested for deliberately setting fires. So whether it's 183 or whether it's 24, somebody was arrested. And NPR just leaves that out. We're going to blame climate change. Shouldn't we start our report by blaming the people who started the fires? Possibly. Let's go to what Snopes does, because a lot of people go to Snopes to find out the truth. But I don't know. You can tell me if you think this is honest or dishonest. Were nearly 200 people arrested for deliberately starting Australian bushfires. Misinformation spread wildly as bushfires devastated Australia in late 2019 and early 2020. Now, this was published January the 7th as well. Now, the Christian Post, they posted their article on January the 7th. ABC News, January the 7th. So I've got 24 people arrested, 183 people arrested, and now I've got Snopes telling me misinformation was being spread wildly. All right, what is going on? Here's what they have. They have claim. Nearly 200 Australians were arrested in late 2019 and early 2020 for deliberately setting bushfires. Rating, false. Whoa. So it's false. All right, what is going on? This is what they say. In early January 2020, as bushfires continued to devastate millions of acres on the eastern coast of Australia, various news outlets and social media personalities spread information about the number of people criminally charged with arson in those fires. The unprecedented fires, which have killed at least 24 people, have destroyed 1,400 homes and killed millions of animals. The fires have been facilitated by extreme weather linked to climate change, like drought and a prolonged wildfire season in Australia, which has been experiencing extreme heat. The fires are so powerful that they're creating their own weather and are expected to continue burning for months to come. But some, including Alex Jones' conspiracy site InfoWars, that spreads climate change denialism, falsely reported that nearly 200 people were arrested in Australia for deliberately starting bushfires. That would be a distortion of the facts. Police in South New Wales released a statement disclosing that since November the 8th, 2019, 183 people, including 40 juveniles, have been charged with 205 bushfire-related offenses. Now, wait a minute. Okay, no, stop right here. They say that it's false. And remember the claim? Nearly 200? Nearly 200? Then they say this is a distortion of facts. Then they report police in New South Wales released a statement disclosing that since November the 8th, 2019, 183 people, including 40 juveniles, have been charged with 205 bushfire-related offenses. All right, that seems 183, 40 juveniles. They've been charged with 205 bushfire-related offenses. Okay, let's see how they correct this to make this false. Of the 183, 24 people have been charged with deliberately setting fires. According to a police, of the 183, another 53 people have had legal actions for allegedly failing to comply with total fire ban. And an additional 47 people have had legal actions for allegedly discarding a lighted cigarette or match on land. All right, I don't understand. So people are being arrested for things related to fires. All right, they're acting like it's false. Now, let me go back to the main page. ABC News, okay, 24 Australians arrested for deliberately setting fires this season. 24 Australians in the state of New South Wales have been arrested since early November for intentionally setting fires as record large blazes continue to burn across the country. There have been 24 people charged with deliberately setting fires, among 183 facing legal action in the state. In addition, those facing most serious charges of starting fires intentionally, authorities said another 53 people are facing legal action for not complying with state fire ban. 47 people face legal action for discarding a lit cigarette. So I don't understand. I mean, when they say these conspiracy sites are falsely reporting it, I've read some of those supposed conspiracy sites, and they're reporting literally what ABC News is reporting. They say nearly 183 people were arrested, just like the Christian Post did, and then they break down the numbers. I don't understand how, and Snopes is acting like that this is a conspiracy. In fact, let's look at the Christian Post. All right, 183 people arrested for arson as deadly bushfires rage, at least 25 people killed. Australian authorities have arrested 183 people on bushfire-related offenses, some for deliberately setting fires that have ravaged parts of the nation. Police in the state of Queensland have determined that arsonists lit 103 of the blazes. So you have police in Queensland determining that arsonists lit 103 of the blazes. 98 culprits have been identified, 67 of them juveniles. And then they go through all the numbers and they break it down. 24 people in South Wales. I mean, they name all the places and all the locations. So but Snopes is acting like, hey, this is a grand conspiracy. So I don't know. And they're blaming climate deniers. So I think it almost seems like if you say, hey, wait a minute, these fires were started by people, you're a climate change denier or you're a conspiracy theorist. Yet I've got multiple news agencies and reports from the police in fact, I had a report from a news station in Australia, and one of those areas stating the police are determining these to be the cause of these to be arson. So I don't know how Snopes is saying this is all like a false news, a false claim created by conspiracy theorists. Now they throw in Alex Jones's name, but he's not the only one saying it. ABC News and others are reporting literally those same facts. And so it's really baffling to me. So I just want to make sure you understand that when you hear people talking about this, that is being left out in the news coverage. All right. So so let's go through this again. Fires are tragic. The news media is reporting this, and they are talking about the fires that are tragic, but they're also pushing another part of their narrative that this is climate change in action. All right. Climate change is the cause. Now, I'm not here to fight about denying climate change or arguing with it. That's not the goal here. Here's what I would say. Even if you believe climate change is involved, and if you believe climate change is a major contributor to this discussion or to this problem, don't you believe a vital part of the discussion has to also be that many of these fires were started by people deliberately, arson, and that people have been arrested for it? Shouldn't the first source of blame, should it not be the first individuals or the first thing we're going to point blame to? Shouldn't it be to the people who deliberately started the fires? Should they not get the blame? Now, that doesn't quite fit your narrative of climate change. I understand that, but don't you still have to do that if, let me stress this, if truth is what's most important to you? Now, you could say it this way. These fires appear to have been deliberately set by people, and these people should be arrested and they should be persecuted to the fullest extent of the law. However, we believe the reason these fires were so severe was because of climate change, and here's our 4 reasons for that. That would be a more accurate way of reporting, but it doesn't get the focus on climate change because a lot of people are going to stop listening after you say these fires were set by people. They're not going to hear the climate change talk because they're going to be like, well, stop people from setting fires and you don't have to worry about it. Right? So a lot of people, so it doesn't fit the narrative. So leave that out. That's deliberately misrepresenting the facts. That's not giving people all the truth. And you're doing so because you have a presupposition, you have a system of belief, and that's how you want to interpret the story. All right. Now, let's move that over to Christians. I have a Bible in my hand. And I believe many Christians use this same method to interpret the Bible. I'm going to call it the climate change method of biblical interpretation, the climate change method of Bible interpretation. You have presuppositions. You have a system of belief. And what do you do with that system of belief? You place it over the Bible. And you read and interpret the Bible through that system. So instead of actually reading the text, what you're doing is reading your system into the text. And guess what happens? When you read the Bible through your system of belief, through your systematic theology, through your preconceived ideas, through your presuppositions, it's amazing that the Bible will agree with your way of believing every single time. Just like if you believe climate change is the cause for pretty much everything, then anything that happens in the world, any storm, any weather, any fire, any earthquake, everything's climate change. Because that's the way you see everything. And when you already have the pair of glasses through your ideology, through your system of belief, and you read everything that way, it's always going to match up. You're always going to think, I'm right. Let me give you an example. If I read from Genesis to Revelation, just read it. I set aside any systematic theology. I set aside any presuppositions. I set aside any doctrinal preconceived ideas. And I'm like, I'm just going to read the Bible. I read from Genesis to Revelation. At the end of Revelation, you come to me and say, okay, based off your reading of the Bible alone, remember that's the whole Protestant thing, scripture alone, that's what we claim. Yeah, I don't think we always practice that. But so based off your reading of scripture alone, stress the word alone, tell me what the Bible teaches about baptism. Well, if I read the Bible, what I see is baptism kind of really, obviously it shows up in the New Testament. And I see adults, that's what I see, they go down into the water. They are baptized, and they are baptized after they believe. They have to believe. They believe something. Their baptism seems to have something to do with they believe, then they're baptized. They believe, then they're baptized. So it seems to be that if you're going to be baptized, the requirement is you have to believe. Then you are baptized, and you go down into the water. That seems to be the way it's done. Or there has to be much water. That seems to be the biblical language. You go down into the water, there has to be much water, so obviously there's got to be a reason why, and you have to believe, and the examples in the Bible are always adults. Now, we do have these interesting passages where the whole household is baptized. However, that same Bible, when I was reading back in Genesis and other passages, there were times that a household would have a husband and a wife, and they'd be 75 or 80, and they wouldn't have a kid yet. So that means just because a household was baptized doesn't mean that there were any kids there to be baptized. And if I'm not careful, then one person gets saved in a house and then everyone in the house just automatically gets baptized no matter who they are. That doesn't make any sense. So I think the best way to interpret that just from a normal reading of the Bible would be, yeah, everyone in the household who believed got baptized, because that seems to be the normal way it works in the Bible. You believe, you're baptized. You believe, you're baptized. That seems to be the teaching. Well, wait a minute. Lots of Christians believe in infant baptism. Well, they do. I just don't know where they get it because I don't see it in the Bible. Now, I know I'm going to have those who believe in infant baptism going to start arguing with me, but just listen to what I'm trying to say. You have a system of belief that says a baby should be baptized at 8 days of age, right? 8 days old, they should be baptized. And by being baptized, depending on where you fall in the spectrum of infant baptism, their sins are washed away and they become a Christian, or, well, they just now become a part of the covenant family. They now become a part of the church. They now become a member of the church. They're not really saved. They just are now a part of the covenant family. The mark of the covenant is placed upon them. Because infant baptism replaces circumcision. All right. Now, because they have that system, they're able to find that system in the scripture. And I will argue that any normal person reading it's going to have a hard time finding that because it's just not there. You have to force it. You have to shove it in there. And what are you doing? That you believe it, now you read it. That is not the way it's supposed to work. You're supposed to actually study the text and let the text tell you what's there. But we have climate change method of Bible interpretation. We come up with a preconceived idea, we read it into the text. That's not the way it works. And this is what we do. We're like, okay, we basically come to a conclusion of what we're supposed to believe, and then we only listen and look for things that agree with the way we believe, and then we think we're always right. And in churches, they in many cases, this is what happens in churches. You sit in the pew and you think you're hearing a sermon based off the Bible, but what you're really getting is the pastor is simply preaching his systematic theology to you and then looking at the scriptures that agree with his systematic theology. But you think you're actually studying the Bible. No, you're basically doing climate change Bible study. Here's the preconceived idea. Now interpret everything through this preconceived idea. And they're only going to find the verses that agree with that preconceived idea. Let me give you an example. In Romans chapter 2, at my church, we're going through Romans. We came to a verse that's very difficult to interpret. Paul, starting in Romans 2:6 and following, he makes a major argument that we are going to be judged according to our works, going to be judged according to our deeds. And he goes on to basically repeat himself a number of different ways to stress this point. If you do good, then you're going to get blessed and eternal life and you're going to be saved. If you do bad, you're going to get condemnation, judgment, vengeance. Bad things are going to happen. So do good, great. Do bad, then, well, horrible situation. And it really sounds like a salvation according to works. Now, what many pastors do is, well, they already have a preconceived idea, right? We're saved by faith alone because of Christ alone. That can't be what it says. So what they argue, it's just a hypothetical situation. What Paul is doing is saying, hey, if you don't do good, if you don't do enough good, then you're not going to be saved. So you better do good, you'll be saved. If you do bad, you're going to be condemned. And everyone is supposed to realize that ultimately no one's going to be saved because no one can do enough good. He's just making a hypothetical argument. And so they say this is just a hypothetical. Hey, And they'll say something like this during the sermon. No one here thinks that they can do enough good to please a holy God, right? Right. So clearly this is hypothetical. Clearly he's not saying that we're going to be judged according to our works, because that's not the way it works. And then everyone moves on. Well, wait a minute. If you look up every verse in the Bible about judgment, every verse in the Bible speaks about being judged according to our works. So even if Paul is using a hypothetical argument, the teaching still stands. We're going to be judged according to our works. Well, how does this work? I'm judged according to my works, but I'm saved by faith alone because of Christ alone. How do I reconcile this? So what I did at my church, because again, I don't want to use the climate change method. I don't want to just come there and say, hey, we don't believe in judgment. We don't believe in salvation by works. So I'm just going to tell everyone this is not what it means and move on. No. I'm going to set aside all presuppositions, say, hey, we've got a problem here. The text poses a problem. So let's look first at every verse in the Bible about judgment. Okay, it clearly teaches we're judged according to our works. Wait, Corinthians tells us that we're going to be judged according to our works, but that seems to only to determine reward, not salvation, because it sounds like in 1 Corinthians that even if all your works burn up, you will still be saved. Okay, so there is a judgment according to works, but that seems to determine reward. Does that satisfy this problem? Well, not completely. So how can we do this? So we had to work, and we went through every theory. We worked, and we came up with a possible solution. I'm not going to go into it now. You can listen to those sermons. That is not doing climate change method of biblical interpretation. That is saying, hey, the text says this. We've got to face it no matter how long it takes and how difficult it is. That's what you have to do. So much of Christianity is, here's what you believe. Now read everything that way. And man, I never knew the Bible taught all of this. It does now. Yeah, because once you accept that system of belief, then you read the Bible through that system. That's not Bible study. That's not Bible interpretation. Bible interpretation is setting aside your presuppositions, your preconceived ideas, even setting aside your systematic theology, the theology that you hold to, setting aside to look at the text and say, okay, what does the text say by the words that are used? What does it mean by what it says? And if it goes against what I believe, I've got to deal with it. And you use the basic tools, right? A passage of scripture is found in a book. Who was that book written to? What was the purpose of the book? What was happening at the time of the book? Okay. Now, that passage falls within a chapter. What's going on in that chapter? Who is that chapter written to? How does it fit to the overall purpose of the book? What was going on? Figuring it. Okay, now you have words. What words are used? What are the definitions of these words? What do they mean? Okay, all right, now, based off the context, the historical context, the literary context, the textual context, based off the words that are used, this is what I think it means. Okay, now, that seems to go against other scriptures. Let's look at all the other scriptures. Okay, can we come up with a solution? All right, now let's consider how this was understood in church history. Let's look at how many commentaries commented on it, and let's see if we can come to a conclusion. But I am setting aside my preconceived ideas and actually studying the text. There are people out there today who are looking at wildfires, and all they see is climate change. That's all they see. They don't even see that people are being arrested for starting them. No. This is climate change in action. And climate change may be involved. I'm not denying that. But even if you say that, you have to start with the people who started the fire first. Guess what, Christian? Your system of belief, yes, I'm glad you have it. I have a system of belief too. But guess what? When I go to the Bible is supposed to be the ultimate authority. It's supposed to be the ultimate standard. So I've got to lay aside everything and bring in all the biblical information and go, what? Oh man, this is confusing, and acknowledge its difficulty. Acknowledge it and actually study the text. To summarize, the climate change method of biblical interpretation is where you're not actually studying or interpreting the Bible. You're simply reading the Bible through the lens of your presupposition, your preconceived ideas, your systematic theology, the system of theology you hold to, and then guess what happens? You read the Bible that way, and it seems to agree with your system every single time because you're not actually reading the Bible. You're not actually studying the Bible. You're simply looking at the Bible through a different filter. Remove the filter and look at the text. Don't place any filter on the text. And when you listen to sermons, so many times you're not actually hearing a sermon about the Bible. You're hearing a sermon from the pastor. You're only getting the pastor's theological system. He's just placing his system on the text and telling you, look, it agrees with my system. Of course it does. Because you're reading it that way. Now let's take the text and go, this poses some problems. And then actually study to figure it out. I know I'm offering a radical approach, and it shouldn't be so radical. And I know every Christian wants to claim that this is the approach they take, but it's not. Because if they're really going to engage the text, this is what would happen. They would engage the text using a method of Bible study, using a system of hermeneutics, and they would be able to show their work. Here's the reason. Here's all the context. Here's all the background information. Here's the definition of words. Here's the Greek. Here's the Hebrew. I've put it all together. I've outlined it. Here is my work. Here is the conclusion. And many Christians who argue won't even show you their work because they haven't done the work. They are simply reading it through the lens of their preconceived ideas. And guess what happens? When you do that, you can look at a fire and ignore the fact that it was started by a human being and say, this is climate change in action. You can read the text and find things in the text that are not even actually there. We cannot do that. We get mad when the world may do this with all kinds of ideas. Hey, I don't believe a baby in the womb is actually a baby. I believe it's just a fetus. It's just a blob of cells. I believe you can kill it. That's my preconceived idea. That's my worldview. No matter what you show me, I'm going to interpret it that way. Or you could set aside that preconceived ideas and look at all the facts, and you may come to a shocking conclusion that that's actually a baby. Now, we want people to do that with every subject. Look at the truth. Find the truth. Set aside your preconceived ideas. We want other people to do that. But as Christians, we have to exercise that same concept in every sermon, every Bible study, every small group, every devotional study. We have to do the same thing. We need to bring an end to climate change biblical interpretation. All right, I will stop there. There's so much I don't know if people are going to really understand what I'm saying. I hope you will. I know it took a long time to get to where I was going, and we covered a lot of information, and I did a lot of discussion about the Australian fires, but I wanted to try a different approach. If I just turn on the mic and go, hey guys, stop interpreting the Bible through your system of theology and actually interpret the Bible itself by studying the Bible itself, some people will be like, yeah, whatever. I think maybe using the Australian fires shows how this works in other areas where you have this preconceived idea and that's how you interpret everything. And we listened to a news report about the Australian fires, and all we heard discussed was emissions and carbon footprint and climate change. And you're like, well, wait a minute. Who started the fires? Could we talk about how did they start? And they never even made a case showing how the climate change is responsible. They just made a declaration. They just made, this is the way it is. And that's how some pastors handle the text when they preach. This is just the way it is. Well, why? Because your system of theology tells you that's the way it is. All right, I'll stop right there. All right, tonight at Victory Baptist Church, we should be going back to our study of the Seventh-day Adventists. We've done 2 parts. I posted part 2 late last night, so you may want to go back and listen to that. We are looking up every verse in the Bible that uses the word, or every verse in the New Testament that uses the word Sabbath, because obviously Seventh-day Adventists say that we should be worshiping on Saturday, and that Saturday is the Sabbath, and that we're Sabbath breakers, and we're in violation, and we're following a creation of the Roman Catholic Church. So what we're doing is, we're going to look up every verse that uses the word Sabbath, see what the Bible actually says, and try to come to some conclusions. And some of it may be difficult, but we're trying to actually study the text. I don't believe that Saturday is the Sabbath for a Christian. I believe Sunday is the day we should worship. But you know what? I got to set aside that belief and go back to the Bible and go, okay, what does it actually say? And that's what I'm going to try to do. All right, I'll stop there. Everyone have a great day. And, email me at newsif@yahoo.com, newsif@yahoo.com. Thank you for listening. God bless.